I was grabbing coffee with an old college friend last week. A guy who, on paper has everything figured out.
Right. The high performer.
Exactly. 6-figure salary, the kind of disciplined stoicism you'd expect from someone who spends his mornings at the squat rack and his afternoons in the boardroom. He'd been with the same woman for 5 years, and he always used to call her his anchor.
His anchor, wow.
But when he sat down across from me, his hands were visibly shaking. She had walked out 3 weeks ago.
Oh, man.
And I expected the usual breakup ritual, a few drinks, some venting, and, the eventual plenty of fish in the sea pep talk. But what I witnessed it was a total system collapse.
It wasn't just sadness.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He wasn't just grieving a person. He looked like a man whose entire operating system had been wiped clean. He told me with this eerie, hollow stare that he'd stopped eating. He couldn't find a single reason to keep his business running.
So it was affecting everything. His health, his work.
Everything. To him, she wasn't just a partner. She was his only point of contact with the world that felt increasingly cold and empty.
And that's part that's so terrifying, the asymmetry.
The brutal asymmetry, yeah. While he was spiraling into what I can only describe as a psychological behavioral soak, he showed me her social media.
And she was.
Already out with friends, smiling, looking lighter, re-engaging with the world, as if she'd just completed a necessary software update. She looked awakened, he said, while he looked biologically defeated.
Biologically defeated. That's a powerful way to put it.
It just made me realize that this isn't just a story about a bad breakup. We are witnessing a catastrophic risk management failure in the modern male psyche.
A structural failure.
Right. In our atomized society, the romantic partners become a single point of failure. When that one node goes dark, the man's entire civilization crashes. But is this just unlucky love? Or is it a symptom of something deeper, a sort of spiritual castration?
And that's the real question.
Why is the modern man sinking into a terminal liquidity crisis of the soul while the world tells him that being vulnerable is the cure, when it might actually be the very thing that's neutering him?
Okay. A lot to unpack there.
Okay, let's unpack this. The personal disaster I just described is horrifyingly common, and our mission today is to analyze this critical structural flaw. We are looking beyond the immediate emotional damage to understand the systemic fragility, the why and the how.
Exactly.
And we have some fascinating source material to guide us. We'll explore the psychological architecture that creates this single point of failure. We'll examine the intense evolutionary and algorithmic pressures of the modern mating market.
Which are just immense.
And finally, we'll look at a chilling historic model of social collapse known as the behavioral sink, which seems to mirror the experience of profound urban male alienation.
It's an unnerving parallel.
This isn't just a discussion about sadness, it's a deep dive into structural weakness and what happens when you've over-leveraged your entire emotional portfolio on a single volatile asset.
That framing is crucial. We absolutely must look at this not as a collection of unfortunate individual heartbreaks, but as a crisis of systemic fragility.
Systemic fragility.
Yes. The term liquidity crisis of the soul, which you used, it's highly accurate.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, in financial terms, right, a liquidity crisis means you have assets, but you can't easily access them or convert them into usable funds.
Okay.
When the single point of failure fails, the man may still have his income, his gym routine, his professional network. But the emotional resources, the internal currency he uses to manage stress, anxiety, and purpose are suddenly inaccessible or just non-existent.
So he's asset rich, but cash poor, emotionally speaking.
Yep, precisely. We need to understand why the underlying emotional architecture allows for such a disproportionately total collapse that impacts basic physiological functions, the ability to work, and even the will to live.
Let's start with that core concept then. The single point of failure, or SPOF.
The SPOF.
In engineering and computer science, the SPOF is that part of a system whose failure stops the entire system from operating. It's the Achilles heel.
The one weak link that brings the whole chain down.
Exactly. And when we translate this to intimate well-being, it describes the catastrophic risk of over-relying on one external element, most often the romantic partner, for total self-worth, emotional regulation, and life stability.
You've essentially built the foundation of your entire inner life on a single, unstable support beam.
And when the partner leaves, the system doesn't just degrade, it ceases to function.
And the consequence is precisely the total system crash you saw in your friend. When that sole source of meaning, validation, and emotional security fails, the entire personal framework shatters.
It's not just distress, it's disintegration.
Yes, it moves beyond immense distress. It becomes systemic failure because there's no emotional redundancy. We often talk about relationships in terms of love and commitment, but rarely do we frame them in terms of risk management.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Risk management for the soul.
Because that's what it is. When you have no diversification of emotional resources, the loss of that main pillar means the entire structure of personal security collapses. You haven't just suffered a bad breakup, you've lost the operating system that runs your life.
And this leads us directly to the core psychological vulnerability. The SPOF is rooted in the non-diversification of psychological, relational, sexual, even professional resources.
It's all in one basket.
It's all in one basket. We're essentially outsourcing our emotional regulation to one relationship and one person. And think about how this dependency manifests. It's not just romantic love, it's a leveraging of the self.
Could you give an example of that?
Sure. Your self-esteem might become wholly dependent on your partner's constant active approval. If you are a high performer, like my friend was, your confidence might be entirely tied to their awe of your professional success.
So if they stop being impressed, your confidence plummets.
Instantly. Or, in the sexual realm, your entire masculine self-worth might be tied to one specific physical metric, like erectile function, or the enthusiastic feedback of a single partner.
The moment that partner withdraws approval, or that specific metric fluctuates due to stress or age, or they simply leave, the entire self-system instantly registers as inadequate, causing an immediate disproportionate collapse.
This extreme fragility arises because the individual has failed to develop what we can call self-sovereignty.
Self-sovereignty. Okay, break that down.
If we use an analogy, imagine your emotional life runs on electricity. Self-sovereignty is having your own internal generator, your own battery, and the training to use them.
So you're not dependent on the grid.
You're not. It represents the capacity for an internal locus of control, the ability to generate personal meaning, regulate one's own emotional state, and define self-worth independent of external approval.
So if self-sovereignty is the internal generator, what is the default state that creates the SPOF?
That default state is dependence, or what we call co-regulation. When self-sovereignty is underdeveloped, the brain is effectively trained to rely on the partner to provide the stabilizing mechanism, the external power grid, for managing stress, anxiety, and identity. The partner isn't just loved, they're a utility.
They are functionally necessary for maintaining emotional homeostasis. So when the partner suddenly leaves, the neurobiological withdrawal is severe.
We're talking about a chemical reaction in the brain.
Absolutely. We're talking about a sudden, profound crash in key bonding and pleasure chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, even vasopressin, that the individual's underdeveloped prefrontal cortex simply cannot manage or self-regulate.
And that's the key, the underdeveloped capacity.
Exactly. They haven't built the neural pathways for independent emotional processing. They are experiencing a biological chemical shock wave without the internal infrastructure to dampen the impact.
Which is why my friend looked biologically defeated.
That's why. He wasn't just sad. He was in a state of neurobiological withdrawal that felt existential because he lacked the internal mechanisms to soothe the system. His brain was screaming because the source of his primary regulation was gone.
This brings up another critical point. Here's where the failure to differentiate attraction from security becomes the fatal flaw in the SPOF architecture.
Yes. This is a big one.
Many people, especially early in a relationship, conflate the intense, chemically driven feelings of initial attraction, that volatile, passionate lust, with stable, enduring commitment.
That initial attraction is powerful, chemically driven by high levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, which creates that thrilling sense of excitement and novelty.
Oh.
But, and this is the crucial part, it is inherently volatile and short-lived.
It has a half-life.
It absolutely does. A resilient relationship, conversely, depends far more on companionate, love-shared values, mutual respect, shared purpose, and deep affection, often associated with oxytocin and vasopressin, which is far more stable.
So if you build your entire security system on the volatile asset, the intense desire, you're setting yourself up for guaranteed catastrophe.
Precisely. If the relationship's foundation is built exclusively on the unpredictable nature of desire, it's fundamentally fragile. Desire naturally fluctuates over time. It responds brutally to life stressors, professional burnout, or parenthood.
Right. It's not a constant.
It's not. So when that inevitable dip occurs, which, as we know from relationship studies, is a normal developmental phase, the person dependent on that intense attraction interprets it not as a normal phase, but as a catastrophic failure.
And that triggers the SPOF.
It triggers the SPOF, leading to anxiety, desperate attempts to regain the lost desire, and ultimately accelerating the collapse of the relationship.
Resilient relationships, then, must have built-in redundancy.
Yes, they require the structural integrity of companionate love and shared meaning to buffer the inevitable fluctuations of desire. If all you have is the intense spark, you are constantly one dip in libido or one bad professional week away from the entire system crashing down. You must have stability when the fire subsides.
Okay, so that's the internal architecture, the fragile foundation.
If the single point of failure is the structural vulnerability in the individual's emotional architecture, we have to pivot now and look at the environment that intensely stress tests that vulnerability.
The external pressure.
Exactly. The modern mating environment, especially digital dating, acts as a landscape of unprecedented pressure on human mating mechanisms that evolved for a vastly different context. We are living in an evolutionarily novel environment, and that novelty is amplifying risk exponentially.
And we have data to quantify just how novel and stressful this environment is. We looked at a massive analysis of 1.8 million online daters across 24 nations.
1.8 million, that's a huge data set.
It is. And the results showed exactly how those evolved mechanisms operate when transplanted into the digital sphere. We see a robust sex difference that is cross-cultural and deeply amplified.
Which is?
Women consistently value resource acquisition ability or competency, indicated by education and income more than men do.
Which makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. It's a rational, evolved preference given the higher obligatory parental investment women ancestrally face.
Right. And men, conversely, prefer attractive younger mates, which are traditional biologically driven cues of fertility. Nothing too surprising there, but the scale of it online is something else.
The magnitude of this preference shift online is astounding. The data showed that resource acquisition ability increased romantic interest for men by almost 2.5 times that for women.
2.5 times.
That indicates a massive skew in the initial selection process that drives significant mating market inequality in the digital realm.
Let's break down that inequality with the numbers, because they're stark.
Okay.
For a person of average competency, say someone with some college education and earning approximately £30,000 a year, the average man received about 8 indicators of interest, or IOIs. That's initial messages or likes.
8. Okay, not a lot.
Not a lot. A woman with that same demographic profile received more than 3 times that amount, clocking in at 26 IOIs.
Wow. So more than triple the interest for the exact same profile, just a different gender.
Exactly. And that disparity only continues as you go up the ladder.
What do you mean?
If we look at high competency men, those who have achieved a master's degree and earn around £76,000, they still received less attention, less interest, and fewer IOIs than women with low levels of competency.
Wait, say that again? A man with a master's and a high salary gets less attention than a woman with, say, a high school diploma and a low-wage job.
That's what the data shows. The sheer numbers tell the story. Women, who are already the more selective sex due to evolved parental pressures, suddenly have a surplus of low-effort options, allowing them to become hyper-selective and often focus only on the top tier of men.
So that structural imbalance creates 2 vastly different psychological environments.
Completely different. For the average woman, the digital market creates a psychological environment of inundation. They're drowning in attention, which raises their baseline expectations and drives the hyperselectivity we just discussed.
And for the average man?
The environment is one of extreme scarcity and near constant rejection. This is a massive stressor on the ego, constantly challenging that already fragile SPOF structure we talked about.
And this stress is amplified because the very environment is predatory. We must recognize the digital dating environment for what it truly is: a casino.
The house always wins.
Always. These applications are optimized for profit maximization by promoting match accumulation and keeping users hooked, not by mediating successful, lasting offline encounters.
And the numbers back this up. We know that more than half of users reported not going on actual in-person dates, and this percentage was significantly higher for women.
Why is that?
Because the sheer act of match accumulation, the likes, the validation, has become its own reward. It's a source of gratification and self-worth, particularly when you're receiving that massive inbound attention. It's like a slot machine for your ego.
And the economics of this casino are clear, as you mentioned. Men receiving few responses and enduring constant scarcity form the largest group of paid subscribers.
They're paying to play a rigged game.
A game they're almost guaranteed to lose. The apps are incentivized to keep their paying customers engaged. A successful, long-term offline relationship mediated by the app actually represents a loss of revenue for them.
So the algorithm is not your friend.
The algorithm is designed to keep you on the hook. It's conjecture that they employ AI and match throttling strategically, showing you just enough reward to invoke gambler tendencies, but not so much that you achieve your goal and leave.
So the system is structurally designed to inflict maximum frustration, anxiety, and depression on the men who are paying for the service. It's creating a psychological downward spiral.
It is.
Yeah.
The research labels this disproportionately negative experience for men a potential large public health concern, precisely because the symptoms of frustration and anxiety, which already affect a huge chunk of the population, further impact social skills, making them less competitive in the very market they are desperate to succeed in.
So the SPOF is stressed to the breaking point by a profit-driven machine.
We can integrate the intensity of this stress test using the evolutionary mismatch theory.
Right. Tell us about that.
Modern populations, especially young adults, are living under conditions highly divergent from our ancestral environments. We're dealing with massive anonymity, urban atomization, and critically, a lots of options environment.
Let's focus on that lots of options concept because it perfectly describes the supernormal stimulus.
Yes. Ancestrally, a human might have encountered only a few dozen potential mates in a lifetime. In modern environments, especially social media and apps, you're exposed to hundreds or thousands of potential options constantly, often presented in an optimized, idealized format.
Your feed is a highlight reel of potential partners.
Exactly. That huge volume creates a supernormal stimulus on our mating adaptations. A supernormal stimulus is an exaggerated version of a stimulus that an organism is adapted to, and it elicits a stronger response than the natural one.
Like giving a bird a giant, brightly colored fake egg that it prefers over its own.
Precisely. We are evolutionarily wired to seek the best mate. But when the perceived number of best mates is virtually infinite and constantly available via swiping, it's hypothesized to lead to never-ending relationship dissatisfaction.
So even those who are in a good relationship might find it difficult to maintain pair bonds.
Because the perception of better alternatives is always actively present, constantly challenging their commitment and their emotional investment in their partner. The grass is always greener on the other side of the swipe.
And what's the second amplifier?
Temporary relationships combined with anonymity. Modern urban life offers unprecedented anonymity and low social consequence. This allows men's short-term mating adaptations to be triggered more strongly than ancestrally, especially in settings where there might be a surplus of available women.
You can just disappear.
You can. The ability to engage in sexual relationships with virtual strangers and easily never interact with them again is a significant departure from the ancestral social environment, where reputations mattered immediately and intensely. This shift encourages short-term strategies while undermining the stability necessary for a resilient long-term relationship.
Okay, so if the digital dating market is creating this intense external pressure on the individual's SPOF, what happens when that stress leads to a total collapse of social roles and cohesion?
This is where we need a model to understand the catastrophic internal and societal breakdown that follows when necessity is stripped away.
For that, we turn to a radical historical model. John B. Calhoun's infamous Universe 25 experiment.
Calhoun's work, starting way back in 1947, was designed to observe the long-term effects of overcrowding and social stress, even when physical resources were unlimited.
And Universe 25 was his ultimate mouse utopia.
It was a 2.7 square meter enclosure, sterile, plague-free, with unlimited food, water, housing, and crucially no predators. The environment was physically built to comfortably sustain 3,000 mice.
So, describe the descent into collapse. What happened?
Well, the experiment started with 4 healthy breeding pairs. They went through the initial strive period of adjustment and territory marking, followed by the exploit period where the population just exploded. It doubled every 55 days.
Sounds great so far.
It did. By day 315, they had 620 mice. However, the population never reached the environment's physical capacity of 3,000. It capped out at 2,200 before the final irreversible collapse began.
And the cause wasn't starvation or disease.
No, the ultimate cause of extinction was a behavioral pathology induced by social stress.
And the mechanism of collapse was the behavioral sink. This is the phenomenon we need to understand fully.
That's the key. Despite the environment having 256 living compartments, enough space for every mouse to have territory, the mice crowded intensely into specific communal areas, primarily around the 4 central food hoppers.
So even with all that space, they packed themselves together.
Eating became a highly communal social activity. And this massive, persistent overcrowding in just a few specific spots paradoxically in an environment of unlimited space, led to a total breakdown of social roles and normal behavior.
The pathologies that emerged in the males were, well, they were terrifyingly complex and differentiated based on status.
Yes, the highly aggressive, dominant males, who usually maintained harems and territory in the end pens, began exhibiting occasional bizarre pathology. They went berserk.
Berserk how?
Launching into sudden, unexplained violence with no clear provocation. They would indiscriminately rape other mice, regardless of gender or life stage. Their behavior was just untethered and random.
And what about the less dominant males, the ones at the other end of the spectrum?
At the opposite end were the low-status outcast males. They withdrew entirely from mating, stopped marking territory, and just wandered alone, eating alone, sleeping alone in the upper compartments. All that abundant, unused space.
So they just checked out of society completely?
Completely. They had no functional social role, and while they sometimes fought each other, they showed zero capacity or desire to engage in the social structure that had rejected them.
And there was another group, right? The pansexuals.
Yes. Even further down were the males, Calhoun described as pansexuals. Males who completely lost the ability to discriminate appropriate sex partners, making advances toward other males, juveniles, and non-estrous females. They lacked the social compass entirely.
The female pathologies were equally grim, reflecting a breakdown of the deepest, most necessary social bonds.
Absolutely. The breakdown of traditional male protection and territorial roles forced many females to fend for their own nests. They became hyper-aggressive, sometimes exhibiting violence toward their own young.
Wow.
Others ceased all motherly duties, abandoning their young, scattering their infants across the floors, allowing them to die, and in severe cases, allowing them to be eaten by adults, a form of cannibalism.
Just complete social decay.
The social toxicity was so intense that the infant mortality rate in some compartments topped 90%.
This collapse of social role and competency led to the final, most chilling phase. The beautiful ones.
Yes. The population increase stopped entirely by day 560, and the mortality rate held at 100%. Amidst the carnage, a younger generation of mice reached maturity, raised without exposure to normal social behavior or parenting examples.
They didn't know how to be mice.
They entirely lacked the concept of mating, of establishing territory, or of performing any social role. They were socially incompetent.
They became the beautiful ones because they were consumed by self-care, weren't they?
Precisely. They spent all their waking hours eating, drinking, and grooming themselves to maintain a pristine, unruffled appearance. They lived in total seclusion, prioritizing only physiological fulfillment, the immediate comfort of their own bodies, and made zero contribution to the defunct society around them.
And Calhoun called this the first death.
The first death, the loss of purpose in life beyond mere existence. The individual died in spirit, lacking the desire to mate, raise young, or establish a meaningful social role, despite being biologically healthy.
And this is where we connect it back to the human experience, and specifically my friend who is experiencing his own system collapse.
Exactly. Calhoun argued that, like the mice, humans thrive on a sense of identity and purpose. We require tension, stress, and the need to achieve something, to survive, to engage meaningfully with society.
His parallel is terrifyingly relevant to urban, atomized life.
It is. He argued that if the number of qualified individuals exceeds the number of openings in society, if there aren't enough valued social roles to go around, or if the roles that exist are not sufficiently meaningful or accessible, chaos and alienation, the sink will be the inevitable outcome.
And the people raised in those conditions?
The individuals raised under these hyper-competitive, atomized conditions will lack a necessary relation to the real world, prioritizing only self-soothing and physiological fulfillment, much like the beautiful ones.
The friend in our opening, the high performer whose system crashed, was effectively experiencing the modern human equivalent of the behavioral sink.
He was economically successful, but that's not enough.
Right. His only source of non-transactional social validation and purpose was his romantic partner. When she left, the social roles that had defined his life, partner, protector, future father, they just vanished. It left him in a state of terminal alienation and loss of will, mirroring the beautiful one's loss of spirit.
The conditions are now clearly set. We have the fragile emotional structure, the SPOF, under intense stress from the mating market mismatch, compounded by the social alienation and loss of role described by the behavioral sink.
And when an individual is faced with that kind of systemic failure and existential despair, the mind desperately seeks a sense-making mechanism.
It has to, which explains the powerful draw of online totalizing ideologies.
Our analysis of these online communities, specifically the red pill ideology structure, confirms this psychological drive. The ideology operates on a powerful dual nature. It is both behavioral and explanatory.
It offers a practical path forward, how to act, and a comprehensive framework for understanding the source of one's suffering, why the collapse happened.
Let's talk about the behavioral part first. The appealing content is what gets users in the door.
Right. This content is primarily self-help oriented. Newcomers are drawn in by topics promoting personal discipline, emotional self-control, stoicism, aggressive physical exercise, nutrition.
Stuff that actually works.
Yes, and breaking common addictions like pornography or compulsive video game use. Even advice on communication, often tied to what we call pickup artist culture. These topics promise discipline over one's own body and mind, offering an internal, controllable path to improvement.
That sounds like genuinely helpful, positive content, the kind of self-improvement literature you'd find in any bookstore. So why do people move away from it?
That's the crucial question.
If the self-help content works in areas like fitness and breaking addiction, why do the dedicated users pivot away from it and towards the more ideological, status-based explanations?
That is the crucial question, and the data provides the answer. What retains users long-term? What turns an 87% tourist into a dedicated 13% resident is the sticky content, which is overwhelmingly explanatory.
So the self-help isn't enough.
The self-help provides agency, but the explanatory content provides a unifying worldview that makes sense of their continued suffering, even after trying the self-help.
And the dominant sticky content is focused entirely on status.
Yes, the status cluster accounts for nearly half, 47%, of all posts. This cluster includes the heavy use of pseudo-evolutionary psychology, the rigid stratification of men into alpha versus beta males, and comprehensive, often cynical theories of female sexual strategies.
It's all about hierarchy.
It focuses intensely on explaining how men are defined and stratified by immutable external factors like status, height, wealth, and visual appearance, things that are often outside the realm of immediate control.
So the self-help tells them fix yourself, but the status explanation tells them the reason you are feeling is structural, and here is your assigned place in the hierarchy.
Exactly. The shift from an internal locus of control, from self-help, to an external structural explanation, the status hierarchy, is highly psychologically resonant for men experiencing the emotional bankruptcy of the SPOF and the alienation of the behavioral sink.
It's a more comforting explanation.
It is. If you are struggling, it's easier to accept a complex, totalizing explanation that says the rules are rigged than to accept that your own internal structure is flawed. The status framework provides a coherent, stratified explanation of why they are failing, relieving the personal burden of failure.
And this framework provides what the behavioral sink stripped away, a sense of personal significance.
Yes, it gives them a category, a defined enemy, and a group identity. The second major sticky cluster is neo-reactionary politics, or NRX, which takes this external explanation a step further.
What does that involve?
This content involves specific conspiracy theories, such as the idea that women are responsible for the decline of civilization, or that feminism is a deliberate collectivist conspiracy spread by powerful elites. These explanatory systems provide a comprehensive, totalizing worldview that allows the user to externalize their perceived failures onto a unified enemy, solidifying their own group identity.
We can actually track this psychological journey using hidden Markov modeling. Tell us what the data shows about user retention.
The modeling reveals that most users, 87%, are indeed the tourists who engage casually and leave. The key is the remaining 13% residents who produce the majority of the content.
And the pattern is?
The most common and most important pattern of engagement is that shift you identified, from the appealing behavioral content towards the sticky explanatory content.
How significant is the retention effect?
It's massive. For a user who started in the behavioral self-help state, switching to the explanatory NRX state nearly doubles their median residence time, meaning they stay engaged for much longer.
And the status pattern?
Adopting the status pattern, the alpha-beta hierarchy framework, increases their median residence time from roughly 7.9 months to 18.5 months.
That's a huge jump.
It clearly demonstrates that the quest for a coherent, stratified explanation of life's difficulty is what locks in long-term engagement and provides that desperately sought framework for personal significance that the behavioral sink of the atomized world had dissolved. It tells them, you matter because you understand the real game.
Okay. So let's bring this all together.
Synthesize what we've uncovered. The modern environment creates evolutionary mismatches, like digital dating inequality and systemic social pressures, like the behavioral sink conditions of atomized life that intensely stress a fragile psychological structure, the single point of failure.
And the result isn't just a breakup.
No, the resulting collapse is not merely emotional, it's systemic and existential, leading to a desperate search for totalizing ideologies centered around status as a means of generating lost meaning.
So, if the problem is indeed a catastrophic risk management failure, then the solution must be implementing stoic risk management protocols for the heart and mind.
That's the only way.
The necessary shift is moving from fragile reliance to a resilient, diversified emotional system. We need to implement protocols to mitigate the single point of failure caused by over-leveraged romantic investments.
This requires a two-pronged strategy. The first is relational redundancy.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means the deliberate cultivation of diverse support systems, meaningful, non-romantic friendships, deep family bonds, engagement in community service, dedicated personal projects, and spiritual practice.
So diversifying your emotional portfolio.
Exactly. The goal is to reduce the impossible, unsustainable burden placed on the primary romantic partner. The partner is no longer required to be the sole source of meaning, validation, and worth, which allows the relationship itself to flourish under far less existential pressure.
And the second component, which addresses the root structural flaw, is self-sovereignty.
Self-sovereignty is the internal component. It is the deliberate practice of building internal emotional regulation and self-worth generation, entirely independent of external approval or the unpredictable nature of desire.
This is the resilience component.
It is. An internal locus of control allows the individual to engage in conflict non-reactively and adapt to relationship fluctuations without triggering a catastrophic system-wide collapse. By building up those internal self-soothing mechanisms, the neurobiological crash associated with loss becomes manageable.
Because your main power source is internal.
Because the individual source of stability is diversified, primary, and internal.
So the ultimate goal is moving beyond the fundamental fragility inherent in believing that wholeness, stability, or meaning exists purely outside the self.
That's the core of it.
When you build a life rich in diverse connections and internal strength, the temporary shifting or loss of one pillar, even the most significant one, does not result in the entire roof collapsing. You achieve the structural integrity that protects the heart from catastrophic existential failure.
The individual who successfully navigates this highly pressurized modern landscape is the one who accepts that resilience comes from consciously architecting the internal self to be the primary, diversified source of meaning and stability, ensuring that their well-being is always primarily their own. They internalize the knowledge that even if a major romantic investment is lost, their internal economy does not go into a terminal liquidity crisis.